Hello people, how doing? So, we have the camera comparison for the Mi 11 Ultra and the X70 Pro Plus. Now, if you really think about it, we have got really beefy hardware on both of these phones. It's basically top-notch, but, and even though I haven't actually seen any of the photography samples yet, I can tell you that there are going to be some signature differences between the two, especially with like colors and maybe skin tones. Maybe we'll even see something in night mode. We'll find out in a moment, of course. So for our very first image right here, we are actually looking at a golden hour image. And, well, essentially I feel like, although both are looking very good, we do have more sharpness on the Mi 11 Ultra. You can probably see it on the grass, but I really like the colors on the X70. It's especially because you can see the slight saturation and warmth that you get, especially in the greens, and that's kind of looking washed out on the Mi 11. Again, not a bad image on the Mi 11, but my preference definitely goes to the X70 here. I did zoom in and I found a slight detail difference. Now that could be because of the fact that, the subject is in the shadows and there's just less contrast in such shadows for the X70 versus a slightly brighter look on the Mi 11 Ultra, but even so, I feel like the overall details on the Mi 11 do look better. But for the ultra-wide camera, believe it or not, these images were taken at about the same time. So that's why you can see the slight magenta and just the overall warmth present on the X70 Pro Plus. And that is how it really looked. The Mi 11 on the other hand, it's doing a really weird job here, to be entirely honest. It's got that crazy blue in the sky, which is obviously not how it looked. And the leaves, they lack the warmth and it just looks way too bright for the given circumstances, so I do like how the X70 looks here. Alright, now, this is an even darker situation. And yes, the reason why I'm not taking like super bright HDR shots is because both can handle those situations extremely well, trust me when I say it. Which is why I want to test out the more challenging lighting situations, like this one right here. So, compared to the previous shot, apparently when the light got even more dim, we are getting a slightly unnatural color tone on the X70. We're losing all of that warmth that was supposed to be present, and you can sort of see it on the Mi 11 Ultra. But that said, the Mi 11 also doesn't look very nice here. I'm not really sure what went wrong, but you can see there's a lot of smudging going on, especially in the shadows in the lower part of the image. It really doesn't look very nice, and there is a severe lack of detail on the Mi 11 as well. So although I do think the colors are better on the Mi 11, there's the presence of better shadow detail and just overall better sharpness, I think the X70 takes it. And pretty much the same goes for this shot. Now my expectations in this case were that the X70 would produce a slightly darker but also more detailed result because this is a 2x zoom shot. And on the other hand, because the Mi 11 is cropping in from a much larger main camera, we were supposed to get a brighter but also slightly less detailed result because it's digital zoom. Clearly the X70 is doing a pretty good job, especially with the colors. Like, look at how nice the sunset sky looks on the X70. You can actually see it and tell that yes, that is how the sky would look in a sunset. Alright, now, here's where we have a slight turning point in this comparison in particular. So, I've always taken a lot of outdoors daylight images, and even though they were in sort of like harsh lighting conditions numerous times, these phones can pretty much handle it really well. What I want to see is how well can these phones handle themselves, especially with variable lighting and also various colors of lighting when it comes to like warm light and a mix of white light. Well, that is essentially what I'm going for in this comparison, and in this case, I'd say that they're doing pretty well. I like the contrast on the X70, but it is a minor difference, so I'm pretty much gonna call this one a tie. Now this shot right here, well, yeah, that pretty much proves my point that just because a phone can do like daylight images and colors really well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll do just as well when taken indoors, especially in variable light, like inside a mall, for instance. I mean, a lot of people take photos in the malls, and yeah, clearly the X70 is having a white balance issue here. Now the Mi 11 is definitely doing a much better job, so that is obviously where my choice goes. Now this shot here, this is also with the main cameras, and see, this is the challenging part. There are warm lights in the background versus white lights that are shining down on me. The Mi 11 is handling this situation ridiculously well, to be honest. Like, it's so well balanced, it's got all of the right color tones, the blacks look perfect. I mean, it's a clear win for the Mi 11 here. But contrary to before, the warmth you see in the X70 Pro Plus right now, that's how it accurately looked. It's how it looked to my eyes, and the Mi 11 is balancing it out a bit too much. Now, it doesn't necessarily look bad but if you want a more accurate image, that would be the X70 Pro Plus right here. Also, I really like that we get more shadow detail on the X70 compared to the Mi 11 here. Now for this shot, I'd say it's a similar story as the previous one. This really goes to show that when there's variable lighting, especially with white and warm light, it can get very challenging for both these phones, to be honest. Sometimes the Mi 11 is doing a better job, other times it's the X70, like in this case. The overall warmth that you see here, that is how it actually looked. Also, if you look at the sign in the background, it looks really blue on the Mi 11 compared to the slightly more natural white that we see on the X70, if I'm remembering it correctly. Now this shot here, this was the main camera, and both are doing a really good job. To be honest, I had expected differences to be there, and there are none. I really like how accurate the rich wood color is on both these phones, so definitely kudos to both of them for that. But then of course we can zoom into 2x on the X70, and that is all optical. And yes, the details do look better. There is less over sharpening thanks to optical zoom, but we do lose out on the rich colors that we had. And I'm not really sure why that's exactly happening, and as you can see, the Mi 11 is doing a much better job with colors. But at 5x, I think this is where the Mi 11 pulls ahead with slightly better details overall and just less over sharpening thanks to the fact that we get a very high quality sensor on the Mi 11 Ultra compared to just a small 8 megapixel sensor on the X70. But there is a pretty big difference here. So the Mi 11 Ultra is controlling the highlights quite a bit, especially in those lights in there, but the problem is you get some sort of haloing artifact going on around the light balls, I guess. You can notice it after examining it a little intensely like I did, but to be honest, it's not a big deal, and the extra detail does really help pull the Mi 11 Ultra ahead. At 10x zoom, I think it's pretty obvious we do get less over sharpening and generally more detail on the Mi 11 Ultra. The X70, it's fine, but given that it's already a small and low quality sensor and having not like ideal daylight, it really goes to show that Vivo needs to upgrade this one here. Okay, now this shot, well, these are high resolution shots from both of their main cameras, but I think the colors are the most interesting part here. Because as you can see, the Mi 11 Ultra's greens, they do look kinda unnatural. And I think it's mostly due to the fact that there is a lot of saturation in the set greens. And on the other hand, the X70 gives a slightly more natural look to the leaves, but in an effort to do so, it does just warm up the entire image a bit too much, which is why the white balance looks a little off on the X70. But of course, zooming in, and the detail difference is really not there. Like, both are producing really nice images, and there is maybe just a tad bit more sharpness on the X70, added via processing of course, but honestly, the Mi 11 also looks just incredible here. Alright, now moving on, we have a high resolution shot from the ultra-wide cameras in both, and to be honest, both are doing a pretty good job. The X70 is a pinch brighter, but it's barely any difference, so let's zoom right in. I think for the most part, when it comes to high resolution, you're gonna get very similar results, but do keep one thing in mind. When you're using high resolution modes on both of these phones, you do lose out on some dynamic range. I mean, it's not always a very big deal, but given the lighting situation, it could be problematic. Of course, we're not done yet with high resolution. We get 48 megapixel stills from the 5x periscope zoom camera on the Mi 11 Ultra, and boy does it look detailed compared to the 8 megapixel image here. Yeah, you zoom in and you're gonna see pixels on the X70. Now portraits, I think I've come to a slight realization here. So what I found is that the X70 Pro Plus is indeed my favorite camera for portraits. I think it gives really nice high contrast images with pretty nice looking skin tones, but it would appear that that is sort of limited to daylight images, because in this case, as you can see, essentially the X70 is way too warm. I mean, my black shirt looks almost brown in this case. Pretty obvious there. Also, there's this weird brightening thing going on my face for the X70, which looks totally unnatural. While the Mi 11, it does have better contrast, I'll give it that. But man, I look so ridiculously flushed and saturated on the Mi 11 Ultra. It looks kinda crazy, to be honest. And there is a lot of grain on my clothes on the Mi 11 as well, so yeah. I don't think I'm gonna go for either one of these. But in this shot here, yep, the Mi 11 Ultra is definitely pulling ahead. It's just doing so much better of a job with the skin tones, but most importantly, take a look at the blur and the bokeh in the background. Yeah, this is where, I think this is the first time that I've seen, or maybe the second time that I've seen the X70 Pro Plus fail with bokeh in the background. Generally, I've found the X70 to produce really stylized and very nice looking bokeh, clearly not in this case. I think having a signboard in the background kind of screwed that up. As for zoomed in portraits, we can use 2x zoom on both, but it is gonna be digital for the Mi 11 Ultra, so keep that in mind. And I do want to point out that this time, the bokeh on the X70 Pro Plus looks immaculate. No doubt about that. 70 looks a little desaturated with the skin tones, but it is very well balanced. You can see it in the blacks, just how accurate they look. Alright, moving on, now we have night mode portrait. We do not have that feature on the Mi 11 Ultra, just to be clear, which is why we get more noise, less overall detail, and also a pretty dark image, but well, don't think that the X70 is producing a realistic image by a long shot. We do get very bright and high contrast results that do not necessarily have to be realistic on the X70 when it comes to night mode portraits. I think in this case, given that we have warm lights just all across the street, it's just accentuating the saturation of the skin tones, and it looks kind of weird, to be honest. But that said, the overall quality of the shot is definitely better on the X70, so that is still gonna be my pick in this case. Selfies, however, now if you watched any of my previous camera comparisons, you'd know that I think the X70 Pro Plus doesn't really have very good selfies. Now if you haven't seen them, link is in the description for both of these phones with their playlists. There's a lot of camera comparisons in there, knock yourselves out. But that said, I think in this case the X70 is doing a stellar job. I mean, look at how well balanced everything is. We have good contrast, we have really nice skin tones, we have really well balanced blacks and white balance. Like, yeah, in a nutshell, the X70 is doing a stellar job. The Mi 11 looks fine, but there is definitely a bit of overexposing going on. Now in this shot, once again, just incredibly good and very well balanced shot on both of these, to be honest. There is a bit more red on the Mi 11 Ultra in the skin tones, but I am not disappointed, not by a long shot. You know, I'm kind of surprised that the selfie cameras are managing to handle the variable lighting better than the rear cameras. Not something you expect to see very often. Now this one is a portrait selfie with sort of a backlit situation going on, which is why both of these phones look kind of washed out, especially with the skin tones once again. But I do want to point out how well balanced my hair looks on the X70. It looks a bit on the brown side and just a bit more washed out on the Mi 11 Ultra, which is why I think the X70 just takes a sliver of a lead here. Now this portrait shot, I think the X70 would have been perfect had it had just a little bit more saturation in the skin tones. But that's not really happening, and to be honest, the Mi 11 looks really appealing here. There is again a bit more red in my skin, but I'd say that both are pretty much in a similar ballpark and both are doing a really good job here. But of course, a huge advantage on the Mi 11 Ultra, which by the way is not being utilized to its fullest extent, and it has enormous potential here, but it's the rear display on the Mi 11 Ultra. You can use it to take regular selfies, but that's the problem, you see. You can only take regular selfies. I mean, imagine taking portrait shots or night mode selfies with the rear cameras. Those would be the best you can get. You can't really do that. You can only use a main and ultra wide camera for admittedly very high quality selfies here. And night mode selfie, again, if we could use the rear cameras, I mean, that would be the best night mode selfie on any smartphone so far, but that's not really the case. And so over here, the Mi 11 Ultra is giving us a more grainy and just overall over-sharpened result compared to basically a polished look on the X70 Pro Plus. I mean, I look like I have a kilo of makeup on my face right there. Now, of course, both of these phones have a super moon feature. And well, I must say, given that the X70 doesn't have very good optical zoom, especially with the sensor, it's doing a good job. Of course, the processing is just doing majority of the legwork right here, but the Mi 11 Ultra, man, that's some detail that I've never seen before, to be honest. That looks incredible, and well, part of me wishes I would have been able to take more moonshots, because when I got the Mi 11 Ultra, it was monsoon, so you know, no moon at that time, of course. But the Mi 11 Ultra does not give us a black sky for some very odd reason. It looks very washed out, but I mean, you can quite easily fix that in post. Now, night mode. Oh boy, this is gonna be a lot of fun. I mean, you can see it already, right? That sky. God damn. The X70 Pro Plus, I don't know what like came over the X70 to do this on every single shot that I took over here. But hey, I must say that maybe it's just the artist inside me which does like to make like night skies look really blue. I like the blue color on the X70 Pro Plus. I'm not saying it's better, And I'm definitely not saying that it's realistic, because it's obviously not. But, you know, from a very artistic and creative standpoint, this looks cool. That's the best way to put it. The Mi 11 Ultra is obviously the more realistic shot here, and upon zooming in, there is a classical difference of presence of good amount of sharpening on the X70 compared to a lack thereof on the Mi 11 Ultra. Although I must say that the overall details have been improved with some software updates that I've received over the past few months or so. So that's definitely nice to see, although I am still waiting on the big update that lets us fully utilize the rear display on the Mi 11 Ultra. When's that gonna happen? I have no idea. Now we have a close-up shot. Now this was more to see just how well focusing works at night, and on the Mi 11 it's a lot more finicky in my opinion. Like, it would not focus without tap to focus, and even then it was kind of problematic. It didn't quite get a few of the shots right. The X70 did it in first go. It was perfect, to be entirely honest. And yes, the end result on both of these phones look good. Alright, now moving on to the ultra-wide cameras right here. I must say, the blue in this shot, yeah, I still like it. What can I tell you? That's just how my weird brain works. But hey, again, not realistic, not how it should naturally look. Definitely that would be the Mi 11 Ultra. But regardless, let's talk about the details, because that is where we have a small difference. Now, I don't know how well you can see it because the difference is very minor, but there is just a little bit more sharpness present on the X70 Pro Plus. It does help in bringing out some of the details here and there, and numerous textures you see a little bit more, but it also adds a bit more grain in the shot. So it's gonna depend entirely on which look you prefer. Do you want a cleaner but also slightly less detailed look? Then the Mi 11 Ultra is definitely the one for you. Now this shot is with the main camera, and you know, the photographs, they do not justify how difficult this shot was, because other than that red light, there was basically no other like proper bright light on the subject in the foreground. And the background highlights, they looked completely blown out when I took them in. So I'm really glad that both of these phones could handle this situation so damn well. But of course, there's a sky on the X70 Pro Plus. Now this shot right here is interesting for a number of reasons. So it's not an ultra low light scene, but it is very challenging regardless, because you have a lot of light and highlights. And another small thing that I do notice is that the sky looks proper on the X70 Pro Plus for a change. That's a big deal, to be honest. I think the Mi 11 Ultra is the one with a more bluish sky this time around. You can sort of spot it, possibly. But another thing is that the purple on the Mi 11 Ultra looks a bit oversaturated compared to the X70, so yeah, small differences, but to be honest, both are doing a really good job here. But I'll tell you what, the X70 Pro Plus does a monumentally better job in ultra low light with the ultra wide. The main cameras on both can handle these situations like it's a piece of cake, but the ultra wide is where the X70 really pulls ahead. I mean, you can see the difference for yourself. The Mi 11 Ultra took about a 2-second exposure and it wouldn't take anything more, while the X70 took a 4-second one. And the difference in light, the detail, it's very obvious. Another thing you'd notice at this point is that the canvas with the lady's face in there, it looks warped and dented on the Mi 11 Ultra. I'm not sure why that happened. I took like 10 shots on the Mi 11 Ultra. Same result every single time. I even changed up the angle a little just to see if, you know, it might improve. It did not. I'm honestly not sure what the hell is going on here, to be honest. So that brings us to the end of our camera comparison. I must say, more than anything, it showed us that these phones in particular at least are fine-tuned towards giving us amazing photos and portraits in good bright daylight conditions. But you take an indoor shot where there's, you know, some warm light here and white light there, well, then you're gonna run into some trouble, as you saw right there. I think the X70 had more problems in such situations compared to the Mi 11 Ultra for the most part, and portraits were like a mixed bag, to be honest. I didn't really like either. There was always something or the other that I did not really prefer. And, you know, compared to many other portraits that I took before, this is a big deal. Like, the fact that the X70 cannot handle these kinds of lighting situations, it says a lot. And definitely something I hope Vivo improves upon later on. So for the most part, I don't think there's really a winner here because of just how much back and forth was going on. You're just gonna have to choose. I think a lot of people might go with the Mi 11 Ultra. It's simply because of the blue sky that we get on the X70. But hey, that's entirely up to you. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be seeing you guys later. Cheers.